Good evening, everyone, and welcome to National Life Group's Life Changer of the Year Teacher Talk. My name is Camelia Williams, and I'm the brand manager for National Life Group's Life Changer of the Year program. I'm so happy you guys have joined us today. You're really in for a treat. Teacher Talk is our quarterly series that's designed to create space for educators to connect with one another and engage with subject matter experts on topics that truly matter to you in your professional and personal lives. These conversations are meant to be practical, supportive, and relevant to the real life challenges you guys face every day. Today's topic, strengthening educator well being, is especially important because supporting the well being of educators is essential, not only for personal health, but also for sustaining strong schools and communities and ensuring student success. We're honored to be joined by two experts from Boston's Children's Neighborhood Partnerships, Andy Hernandez and Molly Jordan, who will share their insights and strategies to help strengthen and support educator well being. So, thank you for joining us and thank you for the incredible work you do. And now I'm going to pass it on to the ladies.
Thanks, Cami. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us on this Teacher Talk focused on strengthening educator well-being. My name is Molly, and I've been a social worker for 25 years, with this last 17 working in and with schools. I've worked in a K-8 school as a student support coordinator, and then moving into focusing on providing professional development and consultation to schools around social emotional learning and behavioral health. And in my work, I've seen the dedication that educators bring to their role and sometimes putting their own well being aside in service of our students. But knowing that when educators' wellness is a priority and is supported by school communities, the positive impact really results in stronger school communities for students, for families, and for staff.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andy. I'm excited to be here. My background is in social work and special education. I've been with Boston Children's Hospital for almost 20 years, and in my role, I've supported elementary, middle, and high schools, and I've provided training and consultation to school professionals on the importance of wellness. And I believe that wellness needs to be a systemic priority, not just something we attend to personally. And I've witnessed that when wellness is embedded into the school community, there's much better outcomes for students, families, and staff.
So this slide just gives a little information about our program. BCHNP began in 2002. It's a school-based behavioral health program in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Boston Children's Hospital. This is our 24th year working in partnership with school communities. And with the multidisciplinary team, we offer a variety of services across schools. Andy and I are joining you from the Training and Access Project, which is an initiative within BCHNP that started in 2015 and provides professional development and consultation to support schools in building the capacity to address social, emotional, and behavioral health. So a few notes about our webinar today. So everyone will be muted just to minimize noise for everyone, but the chat is open. So we welcome you to share any ideas or practices that are related to what we're sharing today. You can also use the chat if you're having any tech problems and need help. And so, but we use community commitments to help create a brave and supportive environment for folks to participate in. For this webinar, our community commitments are the following. And so we commit to ending this webinar on time, recognizing that each of you is taking time from your professional and personal lives to be here. And in an effort to honor that commitment, and in order to share all the information you tuned in to hear today, instead of answering questions throughout the webinar, we reserved some time at the end for Q&A. So if you have a question, please just add it to the chat and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the webinar. But our hope is that we can all commit to just attending to any personal or professional needs at any time that you need to, participating to promote your own learning. So participation looks different for individuals, and we just welcome different styles of participation. And being open to different points of view. So we believe that differences of opinion and perspective can be really helpful and can support our own growth and learning. For today's check-in activity, we're going to use Slido, and we're asking where everyone is joining from today. So Cami got us started with this with having folks entered in the chat. And so, but if you can either click on the link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen to access the platform to just submit your answers. And Slido is voluntary and anonymous. And when everyone starts entering their answers, it should start forming a word cloud. And so, and we really want to welcome all of our participants. And having this word cloud is just a way of knowing who's in the room. And joining today's webinar, we have an opportunity to connect with other educators and school professionals, and as a way of being able to learn from folks all over. So, all right, we've got Ohio and Wyoming, the Northeast, Boston, and so Massachusetts, Hopkinton, and so Riverside, California. Um, yeah, we've got a lot of folks from a lot of different regions, from Texas, and so um, this is what I mean. These things are really special to be able to say, like, there's ways to be able to connect all over the country, which is really wonderful. And so from Virginia, um, so Washington, and so Washington State, that's where I went to undergrad. So, got a lot of love for that. So, but yeah, so this is great. We have quite the range across the country. And so this is really exciting to be able to, again, like, hear your questions and kind of, again, share your practices in the chat. If there's things that are coming up that you want to share, like, please, we want to learn from each other in that way. But again, thank you all for sharing. I'm glad everyone can join us today. All right, so our agenda for today. So we're going to start with sharing some information about the prevalence of behavioral health challenges for students, but also about how student and teacher well-being influence each other. We'll move into talking about some common stress reactions, but we'll spend most of our time today talking about personal and organizational wellness, with some questions for you to consider about your own practice, about your school communities, as well as ways to model wellness in different ways for students. And again, we'll save about 5 minutes at the end for to answer any questions. So just please feel free to put those in the chat. So, and throughout our presentation today, we'll hear from educators and clinicians who will be sharing their experiences and thoughts about educator well-being. So I'm going to hand it over to Andy.
Great. Thanks, Molly. All right, so before we dive into talking about well-being and factors that can impact it, I want to start by sharing a definition of behavioral health, because we'll be using this term in the webinar. So behavioral health is something that we all have. It's on a continuum ranging from being emotionally healthy to having a diagnosable behavioral health disorder. Now, many folks are probably more familiar with the term mental health, and actually the terms mental health and behavioral health are often used interchangeably. So they are closely related, but they're not exactly the same. Mental health specifically refers to emotional and psychological well-being, whereas the term behavioral health is more holistic. So it does include mental health, but it also includes things like behaviors, habits, lifestyle choices, and just everyday stressors that can impact an individual's mental and physical well-being. So an individual's health and well-being are not determined by one single factor. They're shaped by multiple levels of influence. So the visual you see here on the screen shows the socio-ecological model, and it's a framework that can help us understand how individuals and environments influence one another. So you'll see that the individual is at the center and is surrounded by all these different social and environmental factors, which can impact their health and well-being. So this can include things like family, school, the neighborhoods we live in, government initiatives, and societal norms and attitudes. And these different systems of influence can impact us directly or indirectly, but regardless, they're still really impactful. So behavioral health is not only influenced by our own biology, but also by our interaction with our surrounding environment. And our students, families, and staff are entering the school building, bringing with them the impact from all these various systems. And this can manifest in a variety of ways, including the presentation of their behavioral health. So as you all know, many students in our schools experience behavioral health challenges. Changes in a student's behavioral health can be temporary or longer term, but regardless, they can create a significant amount of stress and concern for the student, but also for the adults who care for that student, including school professionals, given the significant amount of time that students spend at school. So it's well known that 1 in 5 children and adolescents suffer from a behavioral health concern severe enough to cause problems in their daily life. The research also tells us that 50% of behavioral health disorders begin by age 14 and 75% begin by age 24. Now, in the United States, the most commonly diagnosed behavioral health disorders in children and adolescents are ADHD, anxiety, behavior or conduct disorders, and depression. And even with all that we know about behavioral health prevalence, the overwhelming majority of children and adolescents with behavioral health disorders fail to be identified, which of course prevents them from accessing appropriate treatment and support. So we share this because the literature emphasizes how much educators and students mutually influence one another. So our educators are impacted by what students bring with them to school and how they show up in the classroom. And similarly, the school setting plays a defining role in the social and emotional growth of students. So students are influenced by their interactions and relationships with staff and peers. And a school's policies and the practices they use in a classroom will also contribute to a student's well-being. So let's just take a minute and look at some of the ways that student and teacher well-being positively influence one another. So the first is co-regulation. This describes how teacher regulation helps to manage and soothe student emotions. So we know that overwhelmed, stressed, dysregulated students need calm and confident adults. Emotions are contagious, so co-regulation looks like a teacher accessing strategies that help to calm their own nervous system so that they can better manage the emotions of students. Engagement, so positive student engagement can boost teacher enjoyment and efficacy. And when students are excited and interested in what is being taught, teachers can experience greater joy in their work. And likewise, teacher enthusiasm can ignite student engagement. Relationship quality, so teachers who have positive relationships with students often report higher well-being. Many teachers find these relationships to be a fulfilling part of their role. And for students, positive relationships with teachers can actually be a protective factor, which can help to buffer against the negative impact of other stressors outside of school. And it's found to be associated with better self-esteem and a stronger sense of school belonging. So overall, student and teacher well-being really set the emotional tone for the classroom climate. So teacher well-being really matters for positive student outcomes. When the adults are stressed, the students are going to feel it too, and that will influence their engagement and well-being. So to set students up the best we can to experience success, in addition to focusing on their needs, we also have to focus on the needs of the staff who support them. So we're now going to hear from two teachers, Jody Responti, who's a fourth grade teacher, and Emily Belush, who's a learning specialist, and they reflect on how their individual well-being can affect how they show up in the classroom.
When I'm doing my self-care well, I can be a great teacher, and I can say that with confidence. I know that if one of my kids is having an incredibly challenging day, I know that I'm going to have it within me to work with them in the best way that I possibly can. You know, if I'm not feeling capable, then I'm not going to be able to help them.
I think my experience as a parent has really changed my stance on this, also as a professional. It's really hard to give kids a consistent and safe environment if you have nothing to give. And it's like the idea of pouring from an empty cup. And so sometimes you come into work and you feel great and you're able to regulate and manage all these different stressors that are happening in the environment so you can give kids that consistency and safety. And some days you feel like you have nothing. So it's really about learning what fills you, like what are the things that fill your cup so that you can be that consistent, safe person for kids.
All right, and now Molly is going to talk about drivers of stress in schools.
When I'm
All right, so we know there's a number of factors and issues that can contribute to work-related stress, and it's really common for school staff to regularly encounter workplace pressures. And in schools, these stressors can include juggling multiple tasks and roles, competing personal demands, lack of resources, not having the tools to carry out responsibilities, working with students and families with challenging needs, perception of support from school leaders and colleagues, the overall health of the school environment, and possibly working within a fragmented system or district. So it's common that sometimes even if you've had a tough day, to just have to jump back in the next day in an effort to be consistent for students without always having the opportunity to process what made it a rough day or to find support. And the research tells us that reactions to workplace stressors are often intensified when individuals feel they have little support from school leaders or colleagues and a lack of control over workplace decisions. And these stressors don't always create an unhealthy environment for individuals, depending on the supports available. But acknowledging the drivers of stress and how it impacts staff morale and energy is important because it affects how our schools function and influences the environment. So in this section, we'll describe common reactions to significant stress experienced by school professionals. Compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, and burnout are related constructs that have been shown to be highly prevalent among school professionals. And these stress reactions can impact any school professional, regardless of the role that they're in. People often say that these look just a lot like stress, and this makes sense because the signs and symptoms are similar to those of stress. However, the intensity and frequency of these three stress reactions are more pronounced and have more of an impact on one's life, both inside and outside of school. So the descriptions we'll share are rooted in research. However, they're only brief summaries. Each of these concepts in this section are complex and have extensive literature detailing each one. And also just a note that when listening to these descriptions, like some concepts may resonate with you, and it's helpful to remember that we all may experience these from time to time. We just want to keep in mind the pervasive nature, or if they're lasting an extended period of time, or our usual coping skills aren't working, then it might be time to reach out for some more support. So the term compassion fatigue has been called the cost of caring and is defined as the deep physical, emotional, and spiritual exhaustion that can result from working day to day in an intense caregiving environment. For school staff, compassion fatigue develops over time and often refers to individuals being affected by the trauma that they are exposed to through their work with students and families. It can look like fatigue, decreased interest in helping or caring for others, social withdrawal, irritability or resentment, emotional numbness, sadness or depression, and anxiety. So basically, the energy for empathy is challenged, and it can affect how we interact with students, families, and our colleagues. So secondary traumatic stress and compassion fatigue are similar conditions, and the two terms are sometimes used interchangeably. However, literature has said that the difference between compassion fatigue and is that compassion fatigue sets in over time, whereas secondary traumatic stress, or STS, can occur almost immediately. Some literature refers to STS as vicarious trauma. So secondary traumatic stress has been defined as being emotionally affected by another's traumatic experience. So witnessing a stressful experience with a student or family can produce both physical and emotional reactions. And adults in school are often not given information and support on ways to manage the impact and can just continue to hold on to it, which can contribute to it leading to STS. So symptoms of STS are similar to that of post-traumatic stress disorder. They include exhaustion, anger, fear, decreased sense of safety, lowered sense of self-efficacy. And it can also include avoiding any reminders of the experience, which can make it really challenging in the role of an educator. So survey findings from the State of American Teacher and the State of American Principal in 2002 demonstrated that more teachers than other working professionals, than other working adults reported burnout. So what is burnout? So burnout has been defined as a syndrome conceptualizing as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So, and is the result of an accumulation of stressors over time. So thinking about all the stressors that we just named a few minutes ago, but we can also think about the additional stressors that may be added from our lives outside of work. And so while it can be caused by excessive and prolonged stress, burnout is not simply excessive stress. It is a complex human reaction to ongoing stress. And burnout is a response to work-related emotional and interpersonal stressors, and ways of coping with those stressors just aren't working. So it's that feeling that your inner resources are drained and it's difficult to manage the tasks and the situations presented to you. So poor working conditions, an unsupportive environment, not feeling like your efforts are making a difference can also contribute to burnout. So it can look like lack of energy, emotional exhaustion, not feeling accomplished or effective in one's role, and it can lead to individuals leaving their role or even the field. And so in schools, staff burnout has a significant impact on students and has been found to affect students' academic achievement as well as their behavior. So the quote on the screen says, "To teach well, teachers need to be well, and to be well, they need to be individually and systematically supported in order to enable them to flourish and teach to the best of their abilities. So the stress reactions discussed in this section reflect how school professionals may respond to the various stressors in their roles, particularly when those stressors go unaddressed. So as school professionals, we talk about stress all the time and feel confident explaining to others what it is, why it's significant, what we can do to manage it. However, it's harder to pause sometimes and think about our own stress and take our own advice. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that these stress reactions are not a sign of weakness or incompetence. We're not trying hard enough to take care of ourselves. However, the stigma associated with individuals struggling to manage work-related stress or work-related challenges can prevent folks from prioritizing their health and wellness and seeking support, which can only exacerbate, the reactions to stress that they're having. So to really demonstrate care and concern for staff well-being, school leaders must cultivate an overall system and environment that promotes enhancing wellness throughout the school community. So I'm now going to pass it back to Andy to start talking about ways that we can address wellness.
Okay, thanks, Molly. So we've identified how stress can ripple through a school community, and we now want to shift the conversation from what is happening to us to what we can do for ourselves and our community. So to do that, we're going to talk about wellness, and both personal and organizational wellness are really necessary to sustain a school community. So we're going to be exploring both concepts today. Personal wellness looks like an individual attending to their own health needs. Sometimes when we think of wellness, we think of our physical health, but there's actually multiple dimensions of wellness, such as emotional, spiritual, and social. And personal wellness involves making intentional choices to nurture ourselves in some way. But we all know the care that is needed by school professionals extends way beyond personal wellness. And actually, educators may neglect well-being if wellness is not a value promoted within their schools. So that's why it's equally important to discuss organizational wellness. And organizational wellness is a systemic approach to creating a supportive and healthy workplace for employees. So it involves building a culture of care within the organization and integrating practices and policies that help meet the needs of individuals. And the culture put forth by a school really matters because this contributes to whether or not staff will prioritize their health and well-being. Okay, so in this educator interview, we're going to hear from Carla Jenkins and Janelle Vasquez, and they're going to share their thoughts on why care within the organization is essential.
I think organizational self-care is critical for survival in this work. And I would say from the highest echelon of district work to the leadership of a school, you've got to really prioritize this as something you do for the adults, right? Because we're not always necessarily trained in this work, but we're willing to engage and do the heavy lifting. You've also got to make sure that we're creating organizational space for that, right? So I've watched districts like have gyms in the building, or like if some major trauma has happened, that like counseling services comes in that helps to support the adults as well, right? Schools do the same thing. Major trauma happens in a school, we often and should prioritize the kids, but like the adults were there too, and it could be primary trauma for them as well, right? We often think that the adult trauma is secondary, not necessarily, right?
A school that prioritizes self-care is a school where educators know that they can lean on each other for support, where educators do have time to take a break as needed, where lunch is prioritized, where a bathroom break is prioritized, where you are consistently hearing the message from your administrators that you must engage in self-care and the reasons why. Teaching is not an easy job, and you must take care of yourself.
All right.
I think
So there are different ways to conceptualize wellness and integrate wellness practices into an organization. So today we're going to offer one framework for you to explore, which we hope might inspire some ideas and dialogue at your school. So on the slide is a picture of the former U.S. Surgeon General's framework for mental health and well-being. This was developed in 2022, and it was informed by the voices of many workers, unions, and workplace leaders in a variety of occupations and sectors. And this framework highlights 5 essentials of workplace well-being, which are protection from harm, connection and community, work-life harmony, mattering at work, and opportunity for growth. And it's suggested that this framework just be thought of as a starting point to help an organization identify where change is needed to foster a safer and healthier organizational culture. So our plan for today is to first highlight the components of each of the 5 essentials as outlined by the framework. And then we're going to apply these components to the school context, and we'll offer some reflective questions for ourselves as individuals and for our school as a community. And then finally, we'll review practices that mirror these essentials that we can bring to classrooms so that we're modeling wellness for our youth as well. And we chose to discuss the framework in this way because while it is a universal framework that can be applied to any organization, it truly comes to life when it's tailored to the needs of a specific setting. So there's flexibility in how these essentials can be thought of and how they apply to us. So we definitely encourage you to find meaning in them in a way that makes sense for you and your school community. So the first essential is protection from harm. This essential was formed from the understanding that it's difficult for individuals to be effective in their roles at work if they don't feel physically or psychologically safe. So the focus of this essential is establishing a culture where individuals feel safe to take interpersonal risks and share thoughts and ideas and just fully participate in the environment. So according to the framework, protection from harm in a workplace setting looks like prioritizing workplace physical and psychological safety. So this can include efforts to address acts of workplace violence, harassment, and discrimination. And the framework discusses that there should be policies and practices in place to keep individuals safe, and that these are being followed and updated as needed. Enabling adequate rest. So this means that leaders are paying attention to the length of working hours, opportunities for workers to take breaks during the day, and what's being communicated about getting rest outside of work hours. Normalizing and supporting mental health. So this refers to the organization recognizing mental health and well-being as priorities. And the framework discusses that there should be a culture of promoting and supporting workers' access to supports and services. And then operationalizing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility norms, policies, and programs. And this means that diversity is celebrated, bias and prejudice are not tolerated, and DEIA norms and policies are put into practice. Now, applying these components to a school context, here's some questions that can guide individuals and schools in thinking about what their safety needs are. So it can be helpful for individuals to consider who can I talk to if I have concerns and what do I need to feel safe to express those concerns. So identify the people in your building you can go to when you experience challenges, and also think about what the barriers are that prevent you from accessing those people. What do I need from school leadership to better manage challenges I encounter in my role? So consider the way leaders can better support you with the stressors that you experience. And am I prioritizing times during the school day to recharge? So think about what refuels you and how you can make space in your school day to access those things. And then as a community, schools should regularly assess what initiatives exist that focus on staff physical and emotional safety, and where are the spaces that they can do better. So here's a few questions that can support that process. What spaces are provided for staff to receive support or guidance? How does the school promote mental health awareness? What efforts have been made to create a culture of care in the school environment? And what is the school's response when someone has experienced workplace violence or harassment? By no means is this a comprehensive list of questions. Every school setting is unique, and of course we all need different things to feel protected from harm. So there will be other questions that you'll think of that make sense for you and your school. And again, this is just meant to be a starting point. So, how do we bring this essential to our classrooms so that we are creating physical and psychological safety for students? We can co-create classroom rules or norms that promote safety and respect. So this is a really empowering and collaborative approach to establishing rules in which we can give students a sense of ownership of the classroom and invite them to share what they need to feel comfortable in the classroom. We can model and encourage asking for help. So promoting help-seeking behaviors looks like normalizing asking for help as a strength and teaching students the language they can use to get support. We can teach self-regulation skills, which helps students to recognize and manage different emotions and learn skills to have healthier interactions with peers. And we can prioritize mental health literacy school-wide. So this teaches students the importance of emotional well-being and tools for maintaining good well-being, in addition to helping them to identify stressors that they have and how to get support, all which can reduce stigma around behavioral health challenges. And I do want to mention that a lot of the practices that we'll discuss for modeling the essentials for students, you're likely already doing in your classrooms. This framework just provides a new lens through which to view things that we're already doing. And that can help us to be more purposeful and intentional in using these practices with students. And now Molly's going to tell you about the next two essentials.
All right, thanks, Andy. So, and also as we move forward, you'll notice that there's some overlap in the essentials. So knowing that one strategy may work in many realms, but this next essential takes into consideration how an individual's well-being is enhanced by community and opportunities for social connection. So as human beings, we are hardwired for connection, and the need for belonging is well documented in the literature. The sense of belonging is seen as a fundamental human need where an individual feels a deep connection with others, with physical spaces, and individual and collective experiences. So this framework looks at three things in that realm. So creating cultures of inclusion and belonging. So encouraging positive social relationships through welcoming, helping, reassuring others. School communities that emphasize belonging can really be a protective factor against bias, discrimination, or exclusion in the workplace. Cultivating trusted relationships, so thinking about creating opportunities for staff to build trust and better understand one another as a whole person, not just as your skill sets, through sharing stories or having small everyday moments of connection. And also consistent and transparent communication is a really big way to promote trust building. So, and also fostering collaboration and teamwork. So having the time and the resources to work together in both short-term and long-term work and across roles can be really central to building community. So a sense of belonging is a protective factor that helps people feel safe and supported and valued in their community. In schools, fostering connection and belonging can really improve staff well-being and help prevent burnout over time. So in thinking about our own sense of belonging in our schools, sometimes it can be a challenge to connect with other adults during the day because we tend to put our students first. But a couple of considerations when thinking about our own connection and community. So am I finding time to connect with colleagues during the day? So we know time is such a valuable resource, but setting aside intentional time with colleagues to connect, debrief, support, have some moments of joy can be the key to cultivating connection. And so it doesn't need to be a long time, just maybe some intentional time. So, and thinking about, again, like similar to the last one of just thinking about who are the people that I can ask for help. So, but help can mean a lot of different things. Is it curriculum and questions related to practice? But also think about those who do support us with how we're feeling or experiences we're having during the day. So some schools have established peer support or peer supervision groups that can connect staff with those of similar roles, identities, experience levels, which can be really helpful in finding that support as well. So thinking about as a school community, there are a few things that could be incorporated that are not always heavy lifts, but just create consistent moments of connection. So how are successes and accomplishments recognized and celebrated? So we always look for ways to celebrate our students, but also just thinking about what about staff? And so not always for just like big awards or major accomplishments, but celebrating the everyday wins and really being purposeful about how we define success. So what does success look like in my school? What opportunities are there to learn about each other personally? So just a simple check-in during a meeting or a brief turn and talk at a staff meeting can go a long way. And then also what resources are available for peer support. So as I mentioned, peer support or peer supervision can be both formal and informal, but just making some time built into the schedule for those connections. So like maybe not daily, but weekly. But also, does the school promote help seeking for staff? And again, thinking about the messaging from administration that help seeking is encouraged, not only verbally, but actually providing those resources either within or outside of school. So we're going to hear from Amina Michelle Lord, who's a 3rd and 4th grade educator, and we'll hear again from Jody Responti about their experiences with peer support in their schools and the impact that it's had on them and their students.
We've done at our school in order to help paraprofessionals figure out how to relate with children is first and foremost providing them a safe space. So at one point we had a time where paraprofessionals would come together once a month and just support staff. So that it was a safe space, and we said that what was said in that space would be confidential in that space, so that people really felt able to be honest about challenges. And I think sometimes that's really hard to talk about where you're struggling, and so to have that space in place for folks to be able to say, this is a challenge that I'm experiencing either within my classroom or with this one student, and then to get lots of different input from other paraprofessionals, other support staff whose experience has a wide range. So you've got folks who are brand new to folks who've been educating for 20 plus years. And I think that leads to a place and space where people really feel like they can open up and then also get advice from your colleagues who may have gone through something similar, or a safe place to be able to share, I think, is a great place to start.
Having a support system at school, as educators, constantly running around in the copier room, working with kids through our breaks, and I make sure that every day I have lunch with my team, and we stop and we eat together and we just chat. And it's a time where we're not making copies, and we have agreed on it, and we do it every single day. We spend at least the first 20 minutes of lunch just eating and talking with one another, and we hold each other accountable to it. And it's just that time where you get to talk to other adults and just vent or debrief your day in a adult manner. But yeah, self-care is critical. I believe that if I'm not okay, my kids aren't going to be okay.
What we've done at our
So again, turning to think about how we build these supports for students, because as we know, that school belonging is critical for a student's success. Students place high value on forming and maintaining friendships and fitting in with their surrounding environments. But their need to belong is far more than a desire for social approval. It's deeply rooted in that human motivation to have interpersonal attachments, and also it matters for their individual development and well-being. So in fostering connection, it can be helpful to look for opportunities just for peer-to-peer support. And that can be as simple as group work with students, or peer mentoring program where older students are supporting younger students, or just groups around common interests. So just thinking about that intentional peer time. Using affirming language, including having materials around the classroom that reflect students' identities. So can they see themselves in the school? Do they see and hear their identities represented in a positive, welcoming, and a respectful way? Thinking about teaching compassionate responses. So sometimes we think this is automatic, but it could be helpful to have some language that is purposely taught about, like, what does compassionate language sound like? It can be really helpful to build in opportunities for active or reflective listening, and also think about how we're modeling that. And then name what we're doing. Like, this is why I responded in this way. And also, again, we come back to this normalizing and encouraging help seeking. And so this can include like staff working to ensure that every student is connected to an adult in the school that they feel comfortable reaching out to for help. And it doesn't always need to be their current teacher, just someone in the school. Do we know that every student in the school has an adult that they can go to and ask for help? And so, and again, thinking about how we model this for students in terms of asking for help from colleagues, asking for help from students, and also just knowing that mistakes are okay, and asking for help is always okay. So moving into the third essential here, so similar to community and connection, this essential focuses on work-life harmony. And it looks at staff not only for their work roles, but whole people with needs and roles and responsibilities outside of work, and whether they need time for routine healthcare or something unexpected in their personal life, or just time reserved for, space for rest or exercise or educational pursuits or hobbies. And so this essential really focuses on autonomy and flexibility. So looking at providing more autonomy about how the work is done. So this speaks to the idea that there will always be what needs to be done, the task needed, but is there opportunity for how it can be done? Like what works best may look different from person to person. So while this work is still getting done. Making schedules as flexible and predictable as possible. So this framework talks about finding opportunities for flexibility in the schedule if a need arises, but also the importance of a predictable schedule in order to plan for life within and outside of school. Increasing access to paid leave. So this not only refers to having paid leave, but the importance of being able to take it as a protective factor against burnout, and can also increase retention rates since staff feel like they can take the time off. And so, and also then respecting the boundaries between work time and non-work time. So this refers to setting and modeling clear boundaries, separating work life from personal life, and most importantly, not penalizing staff for not working beyond the expected time. And so when this happens, staff report a greater sense of well-being. So with the demands of school, this essential can be hard, but even small steps around work-life balance can make a big difference. So thinking about this again, reflecting on it for our schools and thinking about those small steps, we can start with just thinking about where do I have autonomy? Where would I like more autonomy? So being able to look at the work that you're being asked to do and seeing where you'd like to have more say in that work, or where you feel like you'd have the most autonomy to be creative or to honor your own work style. And again, we know there's consistent tasks that always need to get done, but having some autonomy about how those tasks get done can be really helpful. And also thinking about how do I plan my week to ensure I have time for things outside of school. So even with the demands of your role, how are you making intentional time for that which fills your cup and brings joy and purpose to your life outside of work? And this doesn't need to be a big task, again, like maybe a phone call to a friend after school or finding time for a hobby, just spending time with family. Or there's also just some ways in thinking about transitioning from our work self to our personal lives. Like, is there an end of the day ritual that you close it out with? Is there something that you do when you get home? Is it something about turning off notifications or just changing clothes sometimes or sharing a routine with folks in the house? But again, making that distinction when that shift happens. From a school community perspective, a couple of questions might include like, what steps does the school take to encourage that balance? So again, thinking about access to time off, but a system that allows you and encourages you to actually take that time. But also when thinking about time, this can also include doing things like shortening meetings, or having fewer default meetings. And so making sure that meetings have a clear agenda and purpose so it feels productive and balanced. And so, and then also what messages do staff receive about prioritizing their physical and mental health? So is it encouraged to take a sick day if you don't feel well? Again, are there resources shared, like not only in the school, but in the community as well? So overall, just thinking about staff members holistically, not just for their role in the school, but as a human who has responsibilities within the school setting, but also the importance of our life outside of school. So we're going to hear from Emily and Amina again, talking about the importance of being given support, both as individuals and as school systems, to take care of our own needs in order to care for others.
A really important piece of personal or organizational self-care is the understanding that if we have nothing to give, there's nothing. So sometimes there's this emphasis on like, well, you have to be here, we have to keep moving, we have to keep doing these things. But actually, we're doing more harm than good if we have kind of volatile or inconsistent adults in our community, where it would actually be better to have someone not be present or to take a moment or to step out of the room or whatever that person needs in the long run, because then they're able to, when they are in front of kids, they're consistent and safe and able to really set the tone for the community.
Self-care is a priority. It looks like adults taking care of themselves so you can be your very best adult for the children in front of you. It means, and this is easier for me to say than do, it means if you're starting to feel sick, you take a day off before you're super sick. It means if you're super sick, you stay home and take care of yourself. It means that it's okay to take a day even if you're not sick, to just take care of yourself, right? And so I say it's really, we keep having these conversations at school, because there are some of us who we are like so committed to it that we're not taking care of ourselves. Like we're running ourselves into the ground, and in the long run, you're not going to be your best for the children in front of you. That it's really okay to take care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally. It's a work in progress for lots of us.
Yes. Um,
Thinking of really
so in bringing this concept into our work with students, we can think about this in a few different ways. Think about that autonomy. So identify and provide opportunities for independent problem solving. So how can students explore problem solving on their own? What opportunities do they have for exploring their own strengths and ideas about how to solve problems? And what support do they need in order to solve problems independently? Learning about a student's interests beyond academics. And so a lot of schools use the Get to Know You survey to learn about a student's interests, but you can always explore, activities with students, sports, debate, arts of all kind, dance, chess, board games, but also thinking about, are there ways to incorporate those interests into their academics? Can they talk about their hobbies in an essay or science project or an art project? So again, just kind of to incorporate those two things. Preview and plan for accomplishing tasks. So this is particularly helpful for students who struggle with executive functioning or who experience anxiety, but having support to also teach about planning ahead, to be prepared, everything gets done, and there's opportunities for ask for help. And so, and lastly, just thinking about incorporating health and wellness into lessons. And so some schools do have health classes, but it's also sometimes possible to incorporate health and wellness into a lesson with mental health literacy or sleep hygiene or nutrition. This can be an opportunity to partner with the school nurse or the behavioral health professional in your building to think about what would work for the students in your school. So as Andy said, like many of these you may already do with students, this just offers a different lens about how and when you use them. And I'm going to hand it back to Andy to talk about the last two essentials.
All right, so mattering at work is our fourth essential. This essential centers on individuals knowing who they are, the role they act in, and that what they do at work is valued and respected, and it promotes recognizing one's purpose. So the components of this essential are provide a living wage. This refers to organizations reviewing resources that have been made available to workers, including compensation, but also access to benefits that support health and well-being. Engaging workers in workplace decisions. So this looks like including the voices of employees in decisions that impact the organization. Building a culture of gratitude and recognition. So this recognizes that when individuals feel seen, heard, and valued, their work feels more meaningful and their capacity to manage work stressors increases. And connecting individual work with organizational mission. So this is about finding shared purpose, such as what are we all working toward, or how does my day-to-day work connect to the larger goals of the organization? So as individuals, it's important for us to take a pause and just reflect on our role and remind ourselves of our purpose and what about the work fulfills us? What called us to it? So how am I celebrating my accomplishments? Are you taking time to recognize your wins, whether those are big or small? What about your role brings you excitement and joy? And how do you cultivate more of this? So this can help us to align our daily tasks with what our strengths and passions are. And we know that experiences of joy can buffer against stress and help to reduce the risk of burnout. So it's really important to consider the parts of your role that fuel your joy and how you bring more of that to your practice, whether that's connecting with colleagues or spearheading initiatives or building relationships with students' families. And then how can I share successes I've experienced to support the work of others? So you all have insight and wisdom and a unique perspective. So how can you bring those to the table to inform decisions and actions taken by the school? And then as a community, schools should be considering what practices are being used to create space for teacher voice. So is teacher input sought out to inform decisions and that will affect the school community? Are joy and gratitude priorities for the school community? And what practices are being used and where are the gaps? And is the school engaging staff in a discussion about purpose and mission? So we know that teachers make a school's vision come to life. They're bridging goals and realities. So their experiences and knowledge can help to ensure that the school's purpose and goals are not only relevant, but that they reflect the diverse needs of the student body. So we as adults want to feel seen, heard, and valued, and so do our students. So how do we bring this to our classrooms? We can introduce gratitude practices. So this can include journaling, brainstorming 3 good things about your week or day, acts to show gratitude for someone else in the class. All these things build school belonging and increase feelings of value. We can offer choice. So opportunities for choice can empower students, and when students are provided with choice about how they learn or how they demonstrate their understanding of a topic, this can help to increase their motivation and investment, and it also allows for self-expression. So choice can be offered across grade levels, and can look like things like letting students choose which books they read or types of activities they participate in. And it can also look like things like flexible seating and classroom voting. And we can create opportunities for student-led routines. So shifting ownership of learning from teacher to students can increase student engagement. And student-led routines can look like things like classroom jobs, leading class meetings, helping guide the class in transitions, or peer feedback panels where peers share feedback on each other's work. And all these routines are great for reinforcing that students' thoughts and ideas matter. And then our fifth and final essential of the framework is opportunity for growth. This essential accounts for an individual's need to continuously learn and acquire new skills so that they can continue to grow in their roles. Organizations can do this by offering quality training, education, and mentoring, fostering clear, equitable pathways for career advancement. So this can look like accessible professional training programs, career navigation support, maybe tuition reimbursement for classes outside of the workplace, or other promotion opportunities, and ensuring relevant reciprocal feedback. So this could mean that every member of the organization has access to regular supervision where they can discuss and process work-related experiences and challenges and get feedback and guidance from a supervisor. So when organizations prioritize professional development and achievement, they're helping to foster greater self-efficacy among employees, which just builds enthusiasm and confidence, and those things help us to bring our best selves to our roles. So when reflecting on opportunities for growth within your role or school, it can be helpful to consider your goals and what your professional development needs are. So are you taking time to reflect on your goals in your teaching role and what's needed to achieve those goals? Maybe that's training, maybe that's supervision or a mentor, maybe that's other resources. Have you advocated for professional development that will help you to grow? So who can you talk to about the challenges you're encountering and what training would help you to better navigate those challenges? And then as a community, schools should consider if and how they're championing teacher growth. So when a school demonstrates value in professional development and supporting teachers in setting and achieving goals, that really shows investment in their teachers. So have staff been polled about professional development that feels relevant or that would be of interest? What challenges are they encountering in the classroom, and where do they feel the gaps are in their understanding or their abilities, and what type of training would actually be helpful? And then are teachers provided with regular supervision where they can receive guidance on professional growth and goals? So regular supervision provides a space for teachers to reflect on their practice, receive coaching, and just can be really instrumental in helping staff to cope with stressors that could lead to burnout if they're not addressed. And then promoting growth for students can look like cultivating a growth mindset. So here's a few ways to do this. We can model being a learner. So a teacher who views and speaks about themselves as a learner can better empathize with the frustration and struggle students feel when they're trying to master something new. We can embrace the idea of yet, so encourage shifting from phrases such as I can't to I can't yet, just emphasizing that learning takes time. We can praise the process, so recognizing students for their effort, their ideas, and the progress they make, not just the outcome. And finding the glows and grows, so helping students to evaluate their work and identify something that went well and an area where they want to grow or improve in next time. And then finally, promoting growth for students can also look like opportunities for self-direction in their learning. So this could look like project-based learning, in which students choose projects that are personally meaningful to them or match their interests, or guiding students in choosing learning methods that align with their unique learning styles, such as maybe interviewing an expert or online research or working independently or with a group. And these methods just help us to move away from a one-size-fits-all approach and really just embraces diversity in learning. All right, so that concludes our discussion of the 5 essentials. And if you're like me, you get to the end of a webinar and try to figure out what to do with all this information that you've heard. So our hope is that this overview has just enhanced your understanding of wellness and really just ignited a desire to make wellness a non-negotiable for yourselves, your students, and your school community. Now, I do want to name that building a culture of wellness within a school is not something that will happen easily or quickly, but we can start small. So we want to highlight some simple practices that can just help to spark momentum in your school community around strengthening wellness. So you can raise awareness about wellness with colleagues by initiating conversations with other educators about personal and organizational wellness. So just check in with them and ask how they're doing, what's been hard, and are they paying attention to their wellness. You can share information or resources with other staff. So share the information you learned today. We also have a short video on our organizational care, and you could watch that with the team. And there's also a lot of great wellness resources online. You can start a dialogue with school leaders, so share your experiences and observations. Ask to add wellness as a topic for a staff meeting. And if that feels too intimidating to do alone, find colleagues who also care about this topic who can go with you to talk to school leaders. And then finally, you can make your own personal wellness a priority. So just try out one new practice. It could be a gratitude practice, celebrating your or your peers' successes, or just finding time to connect with others. And then finally, I think we just want to say you don't have to start by trying to do something in each of the areas we discussed today. That could feel really overwhelming. So just pick one area that feels the most meaningful to you or that resonates the most with your current needs.
All right. So we got to the part of Q&A. I realized we only have a couple minutes left, but I didn't see any questions in the chat. If somebody wants to put one in there at this point, you can. But we also have a few that we usually get that we're happy to share about too. And so we can just jump in with that. And so so one of the things we get, and this is one of the things that Andy was just talking about, is just like, what if leadership doesn't see this as a priority? So what if I want to start this conversation and, I'm having a hard time with, the admin. And it's not uncommon. And so, because there's a lot of priorities in schools, there's a lot of things that folks are trying to get, attention for and trying to figure out and trying to get done. And so, but again, just kind of what Andy was just talking about in terms of like, who does share this vision with me? Like, who are the people who are in this with me that really think of this as a priority? And so what are some of the things I can do that, maybe admin doesn't have to be a part of in terms of like some of those informal peer supervision groups, or, thinking about like when Jody was talking about just having lunch with her colleagues, like, in terms of like some of the little pieces that you can do. Again, like it doesn't always have to be a huge overhaul. Just really thinking about those small steps, and also just like, is the culture of the team that you're on one that can cultivate wellness? And so, but I think that's one of our big questions. I don't know if we have time for more. Andy, what do you think?
I think that's good. I did want to share a link to the framework that we discussed throughout the webinar. So I'm going to drop that in the chat for everyone if they want to read further about it. So that will be in the chat for everyone. And yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat either, but I think that's the biggest one, kind of like, what if there's not that buy-in from administrators at the school?
So, all right, so we can move into, do we get one there? And so how can teachers set healthy boundaries between their professional and personal life? That is a great question. And so I think with intentionality, and so I think just in terms of like being able to be aware of it, I think is such an important thing. And those little, like we talked about, some of the little rituals of like, this is how I leave, this is how I enter, this is how I make my shift, but also how do I set my boundaries too and make those clear? And so, Andy, I don't know if there's, yeah.
No, I think sometimes it just starts with the awareness, right? Paying more attention to your wellness and your wellness practices can really help you to start putting those boundaries in place. And I agree with you, Molly, like intentionality is probably the most important.
In the interest of time and our commitment to ending on time, I'm going to move us a little bit forward. And so, and one is just to offer another resource. So we have a series called Building the Foundation. And so this is a free series designed for school communities everywhere that is supported by the National Life Foundation. This video library offers an introduction to key topics that can guide schools in exploring how they build sustainable systems of support for social emotional learning, behavioral health with students and families and staff. There's additional resources on there. But these are short videos that provide research-based information, practical tools, engaging materials, and so to really be able to build that capacity. And so, and we'll drop the link in the chat for you guys to go to this website. But the other piece is just they're designed for all school professionals, so teachers, specialists, nurses, clinicians, paraprofessionals, admin, and so in school teams to be able to use this in to be addressed in their schools. And so, but mostly we just really want to thank you all for being here and for all that you do for your school communities every single day. And so I'm going to pass it over to Cami to close us out.
Thank you, guys. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Such wonderful information. Look, I'm not a teacher, but I can use a lot of those tips myself. So thank you very much. And thank you all for taking the time to join us today and for being a part of this important conversation. You know, we truly appreciate your commitment to your own well-being and to the well-being of the students and communities that you guys serve every day. Now, if you'd like to revisit today's discussion or share it with colleagues, a recording of this Teacher Talk will be available at lifechangeroftheyear.com. Give me a few days, but it will be up. And you'll also be receiving a brief survey following this session. And we'd really appreciate it if you guys would give us feedback. Your insights will help us to continue to shape Teacher Talk topics and, you know, give you guys the content to best support you and your fellow educators. And we hope you'll join us for our next Life Changer of the Year Teacher Talk on Thursday, June 4th, 2026. It'll be titled Retirement Readiness, What You Need to Know to Prepare with Confidence. It'll be a practical session designed to help educators take clear, confident steps towards planning for retirement. Thank you again for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you all at our next Teacher Talk. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.